It was supposed to be just another regular Monday. The kind of day where the sun hung lazily in the sky, casting a gentle light on everything around it. Students shuffled into room 202 with their backpacks slung over their shoulders, chatting and laughing as they took their seats. No one could have predicted that today, in that ordinary classroom, something would happen that would change everything for one student. Jaden, a quiet 16-year-old with a passion for math, had always been a bit of an outsider. His friends, like Elijah, tried to lift him up when the world seemed to be pushing him down. But it wasn't always easy. Jaden's mother had raised him alone after his parents' bitter divorce, and life hadn't been kind to them. Money was tight, and the neighborhood wasn't always safe. But Jaden found comfort in numbers, in equations that made sense when the world around him didn't. Today, however, none of that seemed to matter. Today, Jaden would face something far more cruel than the hardships of his home or the whispers of his classmates. Today, he would face Mr. Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell was the type of teacher who prided himself on being tough. He liked to call himself a straight shooter, someone who didn't sugarcoat things. But to Jaden, he felt more like a critic than a teacher. It wasn't that Mr. Caldwell was overtly mean, he just had this way of making you feel small, making you feel less than you were. And for someone like Jaden, who already struggled with self-doubt, Mr. Caldwell's words hit harder than most. It all started when Mr. Caldwell asked the class a simple algebraic question. What is the value of x if 3x plus 5 is equal to 20? It seemed simple enough. Jaden had been solving equations like this for years. He knew the steps. He knew the answer. But the nerves crept up on him anyway. He glanced around the room, seeing the faces of his classmates, each one either staring at the board or zoning out. The clock on the wall ticked away, the seconds ticking louder in Jaden's ears. It was his turn to speak. Jaden? Mr. Caldwell called, his voice cutting through the silence. Jaden stood up slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. His palms felt clammy, and he tried to steady his breathing. He walked to the board, his mind racing as he grabbed the marker. The numbers and letters on the board blurred for a second, but he quickly focused. He wrote down the equation. 3x plus 5 is equal to 20. He paused. His brain was screaming the answer, but somehow, his hand seemed to move slower than usual. He wrote down the first step. 3x equals 15. He took a deep breath and tried to calculate. His mind jumped ahead, and before he knew it, he wrote down what he thought was the answer. X equals 5. It was wrong. He stood there, frozen, as the class turned their attention to him. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. The silence was deafening, and Jaden could feel every pair of eyes on him. Mr. Caldwell's eyebrows furrowed as he took a step closer to the board. He looked at the equation and then back at Jaden. That's not right, Jaden, Mr. Caldwell said, his voice sharp. You know better than that. The answer is x equals 5. Come on, man. Did you even think before you answered? The laughter from a few students erupted behind him. Jaden's stomach twisted. He wanted to shrink, to disappear. I am sorry, Jaden mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Caldwell shook his head. It's okay, Jaden. Some people just aren't cut out for math. Maybe you should stick to something easier. The words stung, far more than they should have. Jaden could feel the color rising in his cheeks, his chest tightening. He had tried, hadn't he? He'd tried his best. But Mr. Caldwell's laughter was a reminder of something Jaden couldn't escape. No matter how hard he tried, people always found a way to put him down. He quickly walked back to his seat, the sound of his footsteps louder than they ever had been. His face burned with embarrassment, and he could feel his eyes prickling with the threat of tears. He wanted to scream, to tell Mr. Caldwell that he was wrong. That he wasn't dumb. But he couldn't find the words. Instead, he stared down at his desk, letting the weight of the moment crush him into silence. Elijah, his best friend, leaned over from the desk beside him. "Don't listen to him, man. You know you're better than that." Jaden didn't answer. He just nodded, trying to hide the tear that had slipped down his cheek. Elijah was always there to lift him up, but even his support didn't seem to ease the sting of Mr. Caldwell's words. As the class continued, Jaden felt smaller and smaller, the embarrassment pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. His mind wandered, thinking about all the times he had been dismissed or laughed at. His teachers, his peers, everyone always seemed to think he was the last one to get it. It didn't matter how many problems he solved in his spare time, how many equations he worked through on his own, it seemed like nothing would ever be enough. But deep down, Jaden knew something others didn't. He knew math in a way no one else did. He had an understanding of numbers, of patterns, that set him apart. He just had to find a way to show the world that he wasn't just the kid who messed up in front of the class. He wasn't the kid who got laughed at. He was Jaden. And he was capable of more than they realized. Jaden's day ended in a haze, his mind replaying the scene in the classroom over and over again. He couldn't shake Mr. Caldwell's mocking tone. Couldn't shake the laughter of his classmates. He walked home that afternoon in a daze, barely noticing the familiar sights of his neighborhood. He was lost in thought, unsure of where to go next, unsure of how to prove to himself, and to others, that he could do more. When he finally arrived home, the door to his small apartment creaked open, and his mother, as always, greeted him with a tired smile. "How was school, sweetie?" she asked, her voice soft. Jaden's throat tightened. "It was fine, Mom," he said, trying to keep the frustration out of his voice. Just another day." But as he dropped his backpack on the couch and walked to his room, he knew deep down that today had been anything but fine. Today, the world had told him he was small. That he didn't belong. But Jaden wasn't ready to accept that. Not yet. He sat down at his desk, opened his math notebook, and stared at the equations. They were his only escape. And if there was one thing he knew for sure, it was this: he was not dumb. Not by a long shot. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jaden had always been the quiet one in the room. The one who blended into the background, never quite at the center of attention but always watching, always listening. His life hadn't been easy. Raised in a small, run-down apartment on the wrong side of town, Jaden had learned early that survival wasn't just about getting through the day, it was about finding the things that made you feel whole, the things that could give you an escape. For Jaden, that escape was math. His mother, Tamara, had worked long hours as a nurse, juggling shifts at the hospital and her responsibilities at home. Jaden didn't mind. He understood. She did what she had to do, and Jaden respected that. She'd raised him alone after his father, Marcus, had left when Jaden was only 5 years old. It wasn't an ugly departure, but it wasn't one full of hope either. Marcus just wasn't ready to be a father. He had his own dreams, dreams that didn't include a family. And so, he walked out of their lives, leaving Tamara to raise Jaden on her own. It wasn't that Jaden didn't miss his father. He did, in a way. He missed the idea of him, the idea of a father who would come home, throw him up into the air, and make him laugh with silly jokes. But he never got that. Instead, Jaden was raised on the promises of his mother, who always assured him that no matter what, she'd never let him down. Tamara did her best, but life wasn't always kind to her, and that meant Jaden had to grow up faster than most kids. At school, Jaden was often an outcast. His clothes weren't as nice as the other kids. His sneakers were worn out, his backpack faded and frayed. He couldn't afford the latest gadgets or the trendiest clothes, and that made him a target for some of the other kids. The whispers behind his back, the jokes that followed him down the hallway, those were the things Jaden knew all too well. He learned how to keep his head down and focus on the work, anything to avoid drawing attention to himself. But when it came to schoolwork, things were different. When Jaden sat in class, he didn't feel the weight of his life. For once, his circumstances didn't define him. It was just him and the numbers. From a young age, Jaden had found solace in solving problems. Math made sense. It had structure, rules, and logic. Unlike the chaos of home or the confusion of relationships, math was predictable. If you followed the steps, you'd get the answer. It didn't care about where you came from or how much money you had. It just cared about the work. He remembered the first time he really fell in love with math. It was in 6th grade. He was sitting in Mrs. Henson's class, struggling to keep up with the multiplication tables, when Mrs. Henson introduced them to algebra. It was like something clicked inside him. The idea of solving 4x fascinated him. He started going home after school, trying to solve equations on his own. As his skills grew, so did his confidence. It was like every new concept was a puzzle waiting to be solved, a challenge to overcome. His mother had always been proud of him, even if she didn't fully understand his passion. "You're going to do something big one day, Jaden," she would say with a smile. "You just need to keep pushing." It wasn't always easy to believe that. It wasn't always easy to see a future that didn't involve him getting stuck in the same cycle as everyone else around him. He saw it in his friends, in the people on his street. Life had a way of pulling people into the same patterns: families that broke apart, kids who dropped out of school, people who just gave up. But Jaden wasn't going to give up. Not yet. There was something about math that made him feel powerful. In a world that so often made him feel weak, math was his strength. If he could just prove it to everyone, especially to himself, then maybe he could get out of this cycle. Maybe he could show everyone that he was capable of more than they thought. That belief, that quiet confidence in his own abilities, was something he kept hidden, though. He didn't talk about his love for math with anyone. Not even Elijah. Elijah was his best friend, and Jaden trusted him, but talking about his passion seemed weird. After all, math wasn't the cool thing to talk about. He didn't want to seem like a nerd. He didn't want to draw more attention to himself. But Elijah knew something was up. He could always tell when Jaden was deep in thought, especially when Jaden would come over to his house after school. They'd sit in Elijah's room, both of them hunched over a stack of notebooks, scribbling down notes or drawing out complex equations. Elijah wasn't the math whiz that Jaden was, but he supported Jaden's obsession, even if he didn't always understand it. "You're gonna be famous one day, Jaden," Elijah often said with a grin. "I'm gonna be the guy who says, 'I knew him when.'" Jaden would smile, but he never really believed it. Fame. That seemed so far out of reach. Besides, who was he to be famous? He was just a kid from a broken home, a kid from a neighborhood that people crossed the street to avoid. But maybe Elijah was onto something. It was during one of their study sessions that Elijah first mentioned the math competition. It was a local event, something that didn't seem like a big deal. But to Jaden, it felt like a challenge he couldn't ignore. A chance to prove to everyone, especially Mr. Caldwell, that he wasn't just some dumb kid. That he had something more inside him. "Do you think you could win?" Elijah asked, looking up from his notebook. Jaden hesitated. "I don't know. But I want to try." Elijah grinned. "That's all that matters. You got this, man." By the time Jaden got home that night, his mind was racing. The idea of the competition kept him awake. He had always been the one who avoided standing out. But maybe this was his moment. Maybe this was how he could prove, once and for all, that he was more than the label people had placed on him. As he sat at his desk, staring at the problems in front of him, something clicked. For the first time in a long while, Jaden felt like he had control over something. Not over his past or his circumstances, but over his future. If he could master these problems, if he could win that competition, then maybe, just maybe, he could show the world who he really was. He wasn't dumb. He wasn't invisible. He was Jaden. And he was ready to take on the world. The next few weeks at school were a blur for Jaden. He spent more time than ever buried in his math books, practicing problem after problem. The math competition was approaching fast, and he couldn't afford to slip up. It wasn't just about winning. It was about proving something to himself. To everyone. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Mr. Caldwell had laughed at him, the way he belittled his intelligence. That moment haunted him, and with every hour of study, he built up his determination to show the world that he was capable of much more than people thought. But as the competition drew closer, Jaden began to feel the pressure mounting. Every time he walked into class, Mr. Caldwell's voice echoed in his mind. The teasing. The doubt. Even his classmates, who had once seemed so indifferent, now started to notice his intense focus. At first, they didn't say anything. But soon enough, whispers began to follow him. Jaden's gonna be in the math competition. Isn't that funny? You think he'll actually win? I heard he spends all his time doing problems. Wonder if he'll finally get something right. The comments, while not overtly mean, stung. Jaden tried to brush them off, but every whispered remark chipped away at his confidence, just a little more each time. His only escape was his notebook, the equations that never judged him, that always made sense, no matter how the world around him felt. But there was one thing Jaden couldn't control, the way people looked at him. Especially Mr. Caldwell. It was the week before the competition when things took an unexpected turn. The bell had just rung for the beginning of fourth period, and as usual, Jaden shuffled to his seat, trying to go unnoticed. He opened his notebook, ready to dive into his practice problems. Mr. Caldwell had just finished lecturing about algebraic functions when he called on Jaden again. Jaden, Mr. Caldwell said, his eyes scanning the room, I know you've been quiet lately, but it's time to step up. Answer this question. The room fell silent. Jaden could feel every pair of eyes on him, just like before. He swallowed hard, trying to focus on the equation Mr. Caldwell had written on the board. 5x plus 8 is equal to 23. It seemed simple enough. Too simple for Jaden to mess up. But the pressure of the entire class watching him weighed heavily on his shoulders. He grabbed his pencil, heart racing. Come on, Jaden. You've got this, Elijah muttered from his seat behind him. Jaden nodded, trying to push the anxiety aside. He moved to the board and began to solve the equation, but the words didn't seem to come together as easily as they had in the past. His hand shook slightly as he wrote down the first step. 5x equals 15. And then something happened. For the first time in weeks, Jaden doubted himself. A rush of fear flooded his chest. The answer was x equals 3, wasn't it? No, wait, what if it wasn't? What if he'd missed a step? Jaden froze for a moment, the whiteboard in front of him suddenly looking like a foreign language. The whispers in the room grew louder, but he couldn't focus on anything but the equation. His mind was screaming at him to move, but his body wouldn't obey. Mr. Caldwell's voice broke through the haze. Well? Are we just going to stand there all day, or are you going to finish the problem? Jaden quickly scribbled the answer down, x equals 3, and stepped away from the board. But it was too late. He could feel Mr. Caldwell's disapproving gaze burning into him. That's not the correct solution, Jaden. You didn't solve for x properly, Mr. Caldwell said, his tone laced with sarcasm. Honestly, how many times do I have to go over this with you? A few students snickered, but Jaden kept his head down, fighting to keep the tears at bay. He had messed up again. Just like always. Just like Mr. Caldwell had said. Maybe he really wasn't cut out for math after all. He returned to his seat, his chest heavy with disappointment. Elijah, as always, tried to offer him some comfort. Don't worry about it, man. You'll get it next time. You've got this, for real. Jaden nodded, but the words didn't ease the sinking feeling in his stomach. It wasn't about the mistake, it was about the feeling that everyone was watching him, waiting for him to fail. And every time he did, it only confirmed what they all thought: he wasn't good enough. The following days were a blur of practice and doubt. Jaden spent more and more time studying, obsessing over every equation, every variable. He couldn't let the mistakes slip by. He couldn't afford to mess up in the competition. But the pressure wasn't just coming from his classmates. It was coming from within him too. Jaden was pushing himself harder than ever, determined to prove that he wasn't the kid who failed at everything. That he wasn't the kid who would always be labeled as dumb. But the harder he worked, the more the fear of failure gnawed at him. Every time he looked at an equation, it felt like the stakes grew higher. What if he was wrong again? What if everyone was right? It wasn't until the night before the competition that Jaden finally broke. He was sitting at his desk, scribbling equations furiously, when his mother knocked on his door. "Sweetheart, can we talk for a minute?" Jaden didn't respond immediately. His mind was lost in the numbers. He couldn't afford to take a break now. "Jaden," his mother said again, stepping into the room. "I know you're working hard, but you need to take care of yourself too. This competition, it doesn't define you. You've always been so hard on yourself. Why is this so important to you?" Jaden paused, glancing at his mother. She was always supportive, but she didn't fully understand the pressure he was under. "It's not just about the competition," he said, his voice quiet. "It's about proving to everyone that I'm not dumb. That I can do this." Tamara smiled softly and sat next to him. "Jaden, you've already proven that to me. I don't need a competition to see how smart you are. You've always been capable of great things. And you will continue to be, no matter what happens tomorrow." Jaden swallowed, his throat tight. He hadn't realized how much of this had been about the validation he so desperately craved from others. But even his mother's words couldn't quiet the storm in his mind. The next day, he would have to face Mr. Caldwell again, and everyone would be watching. But maybe it was time to let go of the fear. To stop worrying about what everyone thought. Tomorrow wasn't just about proving others wrong. It was about proving to himself that he was more than just the mistakes and failures they saw. He was Jaden, and he wasn't going to let anyone define him. The day of the competition arrived, and Jaden's stomach churned with nerves. He hadn't slept much the night before, despite his mother's reassurances. Her words echoed in his mind: "You've always been capable of great things." But no matter how much he tried to convince himself that it didn't matter, the truth was that everything about this competition felt like a test of his worth. It wasn't just about solving math problems, it was about proving to the world that he wasn't just the kid they all thought he was. He was more than the jokes, the whispers, the doubts. Jaden's alarm went off earlier than usual, a sound that felt jarring in his quiet room. He groggily climbed out of bed, running his fingers through his hair as he looked at the clock. It was still dark outside, the early morning light just starting to peek through the curtains. After a quick breakfast, Jaden grabbed his backpack, double-checking that he had everything: pencils, a calculator, and a small notepad for notes. But despite his meticulous preparation, there was still a knot in his stomach that wouldn't go away. His palms felt clammy, his heart racing as he walked toward the bus stop. When Jaden arrived at school, the air felt heavy with anticipation. It wasn't just him who was nervous, his classmates seemed to be buzzing with excitement too, many of them heading to the gym for the competition. Jaden walked into the hall with his head down, trying to avoid the stares of his peers. He could already feel the weight of their judgment, the unspoken challenge that lay ahead. The math competition was being held in the gym, transformed for the day into a testing center, with rows of desks lined up in neat rows. At the front, there was a giant banner with the words "Annual Regional Math Competition" in bold letters. A handful of teachers were setting up, checking the rules and seating arrangements. Jaden's heart thudded in his chest as he approached the sign-in table, where Mr. Caldwell was overseeing the event. Mr. Caldwell barely acknowledged Jaden as he signed his name on the list, his eyes scanning the room for the next candidate to greet. Jaden wanted to say something, to make a snide remark, but he held it in. He had no time for petty distractions. He was here for one reason, to win. "Good luck, Jaden," Elijah said from behind him, snapping him out of his thoughts. Elijah had made the trip to the competition to cheer him on, as he'd promised. He clapped Jaden on the shoulder, a reassuring gesture that did little to calm Jaden's nerves. "Thanks," Jaden replied quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Jaden found his assigned seat and sat down, pulling his notebook and pencil case out of his bag. The other students began to file in, sitting at their desks, chatting nervously or keeping to themselves. Jaden glanced around the room. Some of the faces were familiar, his classmates from school, the ones who'd made fun of him when he first started coming into his own with math. They looked calm on the outside, but Jaden knew they were just as nervous as he was. The buzzer rang, signaling the start of the competition. The room fell silent as the teachers distributed the packets of questions, each containing a series of math problems that ranged from basic algebra to advanced calculus. The questions were designed to test every skill a student could have. Jaden's eyes scanned the paper, his mind working to focus through the haze of anxiety. The first few problems were simple enough, things he'd worked through 100 times before, but the farther he went down the list, the more complex the problems became. As he scribbled answers in his notebook, Jaden could feel the pressure building with every passing minute. The clock on the wall ticked down relentlessly, a reminder that he didn't have much time to solve the problems. He felt the weight of every equation, every formula pressing on him, but he couldn't stop. Not now. This was his moment. But then, about halfway through the test, a problem stopped him in his tracks. It was a challenging calculus question, one he hadn't encountered before. The answer didn't come to him immediately. Jaden stared at the page, trying to understand what the problem was asking. He flipped back to earlier sections in his notebook, looking for anything that might help. The seconds ticked away. His breathing quickened as panic set in. He couldn't waste too much time on this. If he didn't finish soon, he'd lose valuable points. But he couldn't seem to make sense of it. The pressure was suffocating. Jaden glanced up, and his eyes locked on Mr. Caldwell, who was walking between the rows of students, offering instructions and encouragement. The look on Mr. Caldwell's face, so smug, so condescending, sent a wave of frustration through him. That's when Jaden realized something. He wasn't solving the problem for Mr. Caldwell. He wasn't solving it for anyone else in the room. He was solving it for himself. With that thought, everything shifted. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a second, and cleared his mind. He wasn't dumb. He wasn't a joke. He was Jaden, and he could solve this. Jaden grabbed his pencil and returned to the question. He read it again slowly, breaking it down piece by piece. The pieces started to come together, and as he worked through the steps methodically, the answer slowly revealed itself. The pressure of the moment, the fear of failure, all melted away as he completed the equation. His hand moved quickly across the page, solving the remaining problems with newfound confidence. The buzzer went off, signaling the end of the competition, but Jaden didn't care about the time anymore. He'd finished. He had answered the questions. He had proven to himself that he could do it, that he was capable. And for the first time that day, Jaden felt a sense of peace. He had done his best, and that was enough. As the teachers collected the completed tests, Jaden looked around the room. He had no idea who would win, but he didn't feel the need to compare himself to anyone anymore. He wasn't competing with his classmates. He wasn't even competing with Mr. Caldwell. He was competing with himself, and for once, that felt good. The days following the competition were a blur. Jaden barely slept, his mind consumed with one thought, the results. The long hours he'd spent poring over equations, solving problems, and practicing every trick he could think of had all led to this one moment. He could hardly believe it. He'd done everything he could, but would it be enough? The announcement of the winners would happen at the school assembly, and Jaden couldn't seem to shake the feeling of anxiety that kept gnawing at him. He'd heard it all before: "You're good at math, Jaden, but that's not what's going to get you far in life. Don't get your hopes up. Maybe next time." He'd learned to block out those words over the years, but today felt different. This time, it wasn't just about the math. It was about everything he'd been through, the doubts, the ridicule, and the way people saw him. Today, everything was on the line. The assembly hall was packed with students. The hum of idle chatter filled the room, and the buzz of excitement was palpable. Teachers stood at the front, organizing the winners into neat rows for the ceremony. Jaden sat with his legs bouncing nervously under the seat. His palms were clammy, and his stomach churned with anxiety. He wanted to stand up and leave, just escape the weight of it all. But instead, he took a deep breath and tried to calm his racing heart. He'd come this far. He couldn't back out now. Mr. Caldwell took the stage, a microphone in his hand, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for participating in today's math competition," he began, his voice carrying through the microphone. "It's always a pleasure to see so many talented students eager to challenge themselves. You all did a fantastic job, and it was truly a close competition." Jaden's hands were trembling, but he forced himself to focus. He had come here for a reason, and this moment was bigger than him. It was about showing everyone, not just Mr. Caldwell, that he was capable of more than anyone had given him credit for. As usual, Mr. Caldwell continued, "The top performers will be recognized today, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge those who pushed themselves to the limit. The third-place winner this year is," Mr. Caldwell paused for dramatic effect, his eyes scanning the room before he called out, "Elijah Turner." A round of applause echoed through the room as Elijah stood, a wide grin spreading across his face. Jaden smiled, proud of his friend. Elijah deserved it. He'd been supportive every step of the way. "And now, for the second-place winner," Mr. Caldwell said, his voice lowering slightly, "the runner-up is Jaden Matthews." Jaden felt the floor drop from beneath him. His heart raced, and his vision blurred. Second place. He'd placed second. He stood up in a daze as the room erupted into applause. He could barely hear the sound, his thoughts consumed by a single, overwhelming realization: he hadn't won. He hadn't come in first. He was still just second. Mr. Caldwell handed him a small trophy, a silver cup, and smiled. "Congratulations, Jaden. Well done." But Jaden's heart wasn't in it. His chest tightened as he took the trophy. He could see his classmates' expressions, half disbelief, half smug satisfaction. He'd placed second. He wasn't the best. He wasn't the one everyone had expected to win. That felt like failure, even if it shouldn't have. He forced a smile, but it felt hollow. It wasn't the win he had imagined. It wasn't the triumph he had hoped for. As he made his way back to his seat, he felt a sting of disappointment burn deep within him. The validation he thought he would get wasn't there. No one was congratulating him, no one was cheering for him the way they cheered for Elijah. Mr. Caldwell had already moved on, calling up the first-place winner. And the winner, taking home first place in the competition, is Daniel Harris. Jaden couldn't even bring himself to clap. He knew Daniel. Daniel had been the favorite. The one with the perfect grades, the polished image. The one everyone expected to win. Of course, he had. Jaden sat back down, staring at the trophy in his hands, feeling the weight of it heavier than it should have been. The applause for Daniel filled the room, but all Jaden could hear was the beating of his own heart, reminding him of every doubt that had ever been cast on him. It wasn't until later, in the quiet of his room, that Jaden allowed himself to feel the weight of his emotions. His mom came in with a smile, as if to celebrate, but Jaden wasn't in the mood for celebration. He was angry. He was frustrated. Why had he even bothered? Second place was still a failure, wasn't it? Hey, sweetheart, his mom said softly, sitting on the bed next to him. You did an amazing job today. I didn't win, Jaden muttered, his voice tight with emotion. Second place isn't good enough. I wanted to prove I could do it, that I was good enough. And I didn't. His mom put her hand gently on his shoulder. Jaden, you don't need to win a competition to prove your worth. You've always been good enough. You don't have to be perfect to be proud of yourself. But I wanted to show everyone, Jaden said, his voice cracking. Mr. Caldwell, he didn't believe in me. He laughed at me. Everyone laughed at me. I thought if I won, it would prove them wrong. You know what, Jaden, his mom said, her voice soft but firm. You've already proven them wrong. You didn't quit. You didn't give up. You fought for something you wanted. That's worth more than any trophy. Jaden looked at his trophy, the silver cup now feeling lighter in his hands. His mom was right. Winning wasn't everything. He had fought for this. He had faced his doubts and his fears, and he had come through on the other side. Maybe it wasn't first place, but it was still an achievement. It was his achievement. Jaden took a deep breath, the weight in his chest finally beginning to lift. The journey wasn't over. There would be other challenges, other moments to prove himself. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to realize that he didn't need anyone's validation. He was enough. The following days felt like a slow unraveling of Jaden's internal turmoil. While the disappointment from the competition still lingered, it had shifted into something more introspective. He wasn't just questioning his place in the school's social hierarchy anymore, he was questioning his own worth and what really mattered. The trophy sat on his dresser, a quiet reminder of the battle he had fought, but it was no longer a symbol of failure. It was proof that he had pushed through, even when everything felt impossible. Jaden spent hours that week working on math problems in his room, not for anyone else but himself. He started to realize that his passion for the subject didn't have to be tied to a competition or the approval of others. Math had always been a way for him to escape the noise of the world, to find something concrete to hold on to. It had given him a sense of accomplishment even when he felt like there was no one else who believed in him. But even with this clarity, there were moments when self-doubt crept in. He would catch himself staring at his reflection, remembering Mr. Caldwell's sneer, the whispers of classmates, and the sting of that second-place trophy. Why had they treated him like that? Why was he always seen as less than, even when he worked harder than anyone else? There were still days when he wanted to throw everything away, when he wanted to give in to the narrative others had written for him. Elijah noticed the change in Jaden. They had spent less time together since the competition. Elijah had celebrated his third-place win with his usual easy confidence, and although he had congratulated Jaden, the air between them felt different. Jaden couldn't put his finger on it, but something about the way Elijah interacted with him now felt distant. One afternoon, after school, Elijah approached Jaden in the hallway. He looked a bit awkward, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket, his eyes not meeting Jaden's at first. "Hey, man," Elijah began, rubbing the back of his neck. "You good?" Jaden paused, surprised by the question. He hadn't expected Elijah to check in on him. After the competition, Jaden had distanced himself, keeping his thoughts to himself. He hadn't wanted to burden anyone with his feelings. But here was Elijah, his best friend, trying to make sure he was okay. "I guess," Jaden replied, a small shrug accompanying his words. "I don't really know." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean you don't know? You came second in the competition, man. That's huge. I don't think you realize how impressive that is." Jaden looked down at his feet, his hands still clutching the strap of his backpack. "Yeah, but it wasn't enough. I thought I could prove something, you know. I thought that winning would make everyone see me differently. But I don't know if it changed anything. I'm still just the kid who's good at math. And that's not enough." Elijah's expression softened. Jaden, you've always been more than just the math kid. You've always been the guy who pushes through when things get tough. You showed up, you did the work, and you didn't let anyone tell you that you couldn't do it. That's the real win here. Jaden looked up at his friend, his heart swelling a little. Elijah's words felt like a balm to the wounds Jaden had been carrying. He realized, maybe for the first time, that Elijah saw him in a way that Jaden had never truly seen himself. Not as the kid who needed to prove something, but as someone who was capable, who was worthy, just as he was. You really think so? Jaden asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I know so, Elijah said, with a smile that was both encouraging and genuine. Look, I get it. It's hard when you feel like you're not enough. But you are, Jaden. You've always been. And the truth is, there's more to life than competition. There's more to life than being first place. You're doing the work. And that's enough. Jaden felt a weight lifting off his chest, like the world was no longer pressing down on him with all its expectations. For the first time in a while, he felt free. Free to be himself, without the constant pressure of trying to live up to others' standards. As the days passed, Jaden found himself spending more time with Elijah, talking not just about math, but about life, about their dreams, their fears, and their aspirations. They laughed together, joked, and even had deep conversations about their futures. Jaden realized that it wasn't just the math that had brought them together, it was their shared understanding of what it meant to struggle, to grow, and to keep moving forward even when things didn't seem easy. That weekend, Jaden sat down with his mom after dinner, his hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. It was just the two of them, as it often was on Saturday evenings. She had been there for him through everything, through the teasing, the doubts, the competitions. She was always his rock. So, she said, looking over at him with a soft smile, how are you feeling about everything now? Jaden paused for a moment, thinking back to the competition, to the disappointment, and to the way he had slowly begun to find peace with it all. He looked at the silver trophy on his dresser, now no longer a symbol of failure, but of resilience. Of how far he had come. I think I'm okay, he said, finally. I think I needed to realize that winning doesn't define me. That it's okay not to be the best at everything. I've got my own path. I've got my own way of doing things. His mom smiled, her eyes glistening with pride. I'm proud of you, Jaden. You've always been brave enough to follow your heart. And that's what matters. Not what anyone else thinks of you, but what you think of yourself. Jaden took a deep breath, feeling the truth of her words sink in. He wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations. He was Jaden Matthews, a kid who loved math, who fought for what he wanted, and who kept going even when it was tough. And that, he realized, was enough. As he looked out the window at the setting sun, he thought about everything he had learned over the past few weeks. The competition had taught him that failure wasn't something to fear, it was part of the journey. It was in the moments when things didn't go as planned that real growth happened. And as long as he stayed true to himself, he knew he would be okay. His journey wasn't over. But for the first time, Jaden was ready to face whatever came next. The following week, Jaden's life began to return to its normal rhythm. The echoes of the competition slowly faded, replaced by the buzz of everyday school life. There were tests to study for, assignments to finish, and math problems to solve. Yet, Jaden felt different. Something had shifted within him. He had a newfound sense of clarity, one that was built not on the expectations of others, but on his own belief in himself. One morning, as Jaden was heading to class, he noticed a flyer pinned to the bulletin board outside the school library. The bright colors and bold letters caught his attention, the National Math Challenge, are you ready? He stopped in his tracks. His eyes lingered on the flyer, his mind already racing with possibilities. The National Math Challenge. It was an event that attracted some of the brightest young minds across the country, a place where students competed not just against each other, but against some of the most complex mathematical puzzles ever designed. This was the kind of challenge that made his heart race with excitement. He felt a sudden surge of energy, a mix of excitement and nerves. Was he ready for this? Was it time to step up and show the world just what he was capable of? The doubt that usually accompanied these kinds of thoughts tried to creep in. He remembered the feeling of disappointment from the school competition, the second-place finish that hadn't felt like enough. But this time, something inside him said, "You are enough." Jaden took a deep breath and reached for the flyer. The National Math Challenge was happening in just 2 months, and he would have to work harder than ever to prepare. But something told him that this was his chance to prove not just to others, but to himself, that he could do it. He could compete at a national level. This was the next step in his journey. Later that day, as he sat at lunch with Elijah, Jaden couldn't contain his excitement. "Elijah, guess what?" Jaden said, almost bouncing in his seat. "The National Math Challenge is coming up. I'm thinking of signing up. What do you think?" Elijah looked up from his sandwich, eyes wide with surprise. "Whoa, that's huge. Are you serious? You're going to go for it?" "I think so," Jaden said, grinning. "I mean, why not? I've been working on this for years, and now it's time to take it to the next level. I want to see if I can really do this." Elijah raised his eyebrows, clearly impressed. "Man, that's awesome. You've got this, Jaden. You're way more than capable. But you know it's going to be tough, right?" Jaden nodded. He knew it wouldn't be easy. The National Math Challenge was no small feat, but after everything he'd been through, everything he'd learned about resilience and pushing through obstacles, he felt ready. "I know," Jaden replied. "But if I don't do it now, I'll never know. I've got to try." Elijah smiled, his usual confidence returning. "Well, then I'll be rooting for you. Just don't forget about us little guys when you win." Jaden laughed, feeling lighter than he had in a long time. It was funny how something as simple as a conversation could make him feel more sure of himself. But this wasn't just about winning anymore. This was about challenging himself, about stepping out of his comfort zone and embracing the possibility of failure, without letting it define him. Over the next few weeks, Jaden threw himself into preparation. He spent hours in the school library, his nose buried in textbooks and solving complex equations. He even reached out to some of the best students in his school to form a study group. They spent late afternoons together, brainstorming strategies, working through difficult problems, and pushing each other to think outside the box. There were moments when Jaden felt overwhelmed. The math was tough, the problems more complicated than anything he had faced before. Sometimes, the numbers seemed to blur together, and he doubted his ability to solve them. He would stare at a problem for what felt like hours, only to feel the frustration building as the solution remained elusive. But each time, he reminded himself of the lessons he had learned. He wasn't in this to win for anyone else. He wasn't trying to prove something to his teachers, to his classmates, or to anyone else who had doubted him. He was doing it for himself. His mom noticed the change in him as well. He was no longer the kid who worked only to meet expectations. He was the kid who worked because he wanted to be better, who wanted to reach his full potential, no matter how difficult the path was. One evening, as Jaden was reviewing his notes, his mom came into his room, sitting down beside him. "You've been working hard," she said, her voice soft. "Are you sure you're not burning out?" Jaden smiled at her, grateful for her concern. "I'm fine, Mom. I just want to be ready. This is my chance to take things to the next level." She nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "I know you're capable, Jaden. But remember, it's okay to take breaks. Success isn't about pushing yourself to the limit every single day. It's about balance." Jaden paused, considering her words. He hadn't really thought about the balance before, too focused on the competition and the results. But his mom was right. It wasn't just about working non-stop, it was about maintaining his well-being, too. "I'll try," he said, and his mom gave him a reassuring smile. The next day, Jaden made a conscious effort to step away from the books every once in a while. He took a walk in the park, hung out with friends, and even reconnected with his love for reading, something he hadn't made time for in a long time. It wasn't that he stopped working on the math problems. It was just that he learned to give himself the space to breathe. As the days ticked down to the National Math Challenge, Jaden felt ready. Not because he had memorized every formula or solved every problem perfectly, but because he had learned that the journey was just as important as the destination. He had come a long way from the kid who had been laughed at for his answers. And now, he was prepared to take on whatever challenge came his way. The challenge wasn't about the prize. It was about proving to himself that he had the strength, the perseverance, and the ability to succeed, no matter the odds. The weeks leading up to the National Math Challenge felt like a blur to Jaden. The days stretched out, each one filled with hours of practice and preparation. He no longer had the time to get lost in the simple comforts of his routine. Every moment was dedicated to the next problem, the next equation, the next solution. But he was ready. Ready to face whatever the challenge would throw his way. The day of the competition arrived quickly. Jaden found himself standing in front of the tall, imposing building where the event would take place. It was a state-of-the-art conference center, its modern glass windows reflecting the overcast sky. He could hear the excited chatter of other students around him, many of them from schools much larger and more prestigious than his own. Some had faces he recognized from online math forums and national ranking lists. But none of that mattered. In this moment, none of that could shake the quiet confidence he had built over the past few months. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The registration area was buzzing with energy. Students from all over the country lined up to check in, their faces a mix of excitement and nerves. As Jaden approached the registration desk, he felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. His heart was racing in his chest, and the voices around him grew louder. The bright fluorescent lights above him flickered in his peripheral vision, and his palms began to sweat. "Name?" the woman at the desk asked, her voice professional and calm. "Jaden Matthews," he replied, swallowing hard. She glanced down at the list, and then smiled, handing him a packet. "Welcome, Jaden. Good luck." "Thanks," Jaden said, trying to smile back, though the nerves still had a firm grip on him. He grabbed the packet and walked over to a nearby table where students were already sitting, preparing for the first round. The room was filled with the sound of rustling paper and whispered calculations. Jaden found an empty seat in the back corner. He set his things down and took a moment to look around. The room was a vast, open space with rows of tables arranged in neat lines. At the front, a large screen displayed the schedule for the day. Several proctors were walking around, checking in on students, ensuring everyone was ready. The tension in the air was palpable. It was a feeling Jaden knew well by now, a reminder that the stakes were high. Despite the anxiety creeping in, he forced himself to focus. This wasn't about impressing anyone. This wasn't about proving anything to anyone but himself. He had come this far not because he was trying to meet someone else's expectations, but because he wanted to see just how far he could go. He had to remember that. He wasn't here to be the best, he was here to do his best. 5 minutes, a voice called from the front of the room. Jaden's heart skipped a beat. The first round of the competition was about to begin. As the clock ticked down, Jaden went over his strategy one last time in his head. He had prepared for months, tackling problems, learning new techniques, and practicing his time management skills. He had come to understand that this competition wasn't just about being the smartest, it was about staying calm under pressure, managing the stress, and pacing yourself. Finally, the signal was given, and the room fell silent. The first round of the competition had begun. The test was grueling, with questions ranging from algebra and geometry to advanced calculus and number theory. Jaden's hands flew across the paper as he worked through each problem, trying to keep his mind focused and clear. The time constraints were challenging, and the questions felt like they were getting progressively harder, but Jaden didn't panic. He reminded himself that he was prepared. He had trained for this. His instincts took over as he applied the techniques he'd spent weeks refining. About halfway through, Jaden hit a wall. He stared at one of the questions, his mind blanking. He had seen similar problems before, but for some reason, the solution just wouldn't come to him. His heart raced, and a feeling of frustration bubbled up inside him. He could feel the weight of the clock ticking down. The others around him were scribbling away, seemingly unfazed, but he was stuck. For a moment, he almost gave in to the panic. Almost. But then he remembered the advice his mom had given him weeks ago: it's not about doing everything perfectly. It's about pushing through, even when things get tough. He closed his eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and let the frustration wash over him. He wouldn't let it stop him. Jaden reread the problem, focusing on each word, each number. He broke the question down into smaller pieces, analyzing it from different angles. Slowly but surely, the solution began to reveal itself. By the time he finished the problem, there was barely a minute left. His hands were shaking as he filled in the final answers and reviewed his work. He hadn't gotten everything perfect, but he had completed it. He had done his best. When the round finally ended, a loud signal rang out, signaling that time was up. Jaden leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the competition lift off his shoulders, at least for the moment. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He had made it through the first round. And that was enough. During the break between rounds, Jaden tried to calm his racing thoughts. He grabbed a bottle of water from the snack table and took a seat in the corner, trying to relax. His mind was buzzing with the questions from the first round, replaying the ones he had found difficult, wondering if he had made any mistakes. But he knew that worrying wouldn't help. All he could do now was focus on the next round and give it everything he had. As he sat there, he overheard snippets of conversation from other students, math prodigies from prestigious schools, talking about the problems they had solved with ease. They sounded so confident, so sure of themselves. Jaden felt a pang of insecurity. What if they were all way better than me? What if I didn't belong here at all? But then he remembered the lessons he had learned over the past few months. He didn't need to be the best. He just needed to be true to himself and give his all. That was all he could control. The second round of the competition soon began, and Jaden took his seat, determined to stay calm and focused. As the problems appeared on the screen, he dove in headfirst, tackling each one with the same relentless drive he had brought to every challenge in his life. He didn't know where this competition would take him, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged. And that was enough. The minutes ticked by relentlessly as Jaden moved through the second round of the National Math Challenge. The problems were even tougher than the first round, but his confidence had grown. He wasn't just answering questions anymore, he was solving puzzles with purpose, applying all the lessons he had learned in his months of preparation. Despite his growing sense of accomplishment, there was still something in the back of his mind that refused to quiet down. He kept thinking about the other students around him. The prodigies. The ones who seemed to breeze through the problems without breaking a sweat. Jaden couldn't help but compare himself to them. Were they all going to outperform him? Was he even in the same league as they were? Don't worry about them, he reminded himself. Just focus on you. Focus on what you can control. With each question he solved, the knot in his stomach loosened just a little more. There were still moments of doubt, of course, moments when the problems felt too complex, too tricky to untangle. But with each problem he solved, Jaden felt more confident that he was where he belonged. The final problem of the second round appeared on the screen, an intricate word problem that involved several layers of algebraic equations, geometric concepts, and logic. It was a beast of a question, one that made Jaden pause for a moment, considering his approach. He could hear the quiet rustling of papers around him as the other students worked furiously on their own papers, but he tried to block them out. He closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. You've done this before. You've solved harder problems. Just take it one step at a time. Jaden started with the first part of the question, setting up the variables. He carefully organized his thoughts on the paper, breaking the problem down into manageable chunks. For the next few minutes, it was as if time stood still. The rest of the room faded away, and all that mattered was the problem in front of him. There was no room for mistakes. No room for hesitation. As the minutes ticked away, Jaden felt a deep focus settle over him. He was lost in the rhythm of solving, adjusting and reworking his approach as necessary, inching closer and closer to the answer. Then, with less than 2 minutes left, he saw the solution. It was like a light bulb flicking on in his mind. His hands flew over the paper as he completed the last few steps, writing down the final answer just as the timer went off. He leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. I did it. The second round was over, and as Jaden handed in his paper, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had given his best effort, and that was all he could ask of himself. Now, all he could do was wait. The room was abuzz with nervous energy as the students filed out for the lunch break. Jaden grabbed his lunch bag, trying to keep his mind off the competition. He found a quiet corner of the conference center to sit down, hoping that some time away from the problems would help clear his mind. As he unwrapped his sandwich, he glanced around the room. He couldn't help but notice how focused everyone seemed. Some were gathered in small groups, discussing strategies. Others were sitting alone, deep in thought. But one thing was clear, everyone here was serious. They all wanted to win. And they were all hungry for success. Jaden's mind wandered back to his conversation with Elijah before the competition. Elijah had told him to stay grounded, not to let the competition distract him from why he was there in the first place. This wasn't about beating everyone else. This was about testing his limits and seeing how far he could push himself. The words stuck with him. This wasn't about winning, this was about proving to himself that he had the strength to keep going. He could let the pressure of competition fuel his drive, but he wouldn't let it define him. Winning didn't matter nearly as much as the journey itself. He had come here to face the challenge, not to avoid it. With renewed determination, Jaden finished his sandwich and walked back to the main event hall for the final round. As the third and final round began, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The air seemed thicker with anticipation, as if everyone was waiting for the competition to hit its peak. Jaden could feel the weight of the moment on his shoulders. This was it. The final push. The first problem appeared on the screen, and Jaden dove right in. But something was different this time. The problems felt more familiar now. They were still difficult, but they no longer felt impossible. He had prepared himself for this moment, and now it was all about executing. The first problem went by quickly. Then the second. Then the third. Each one more difficult than the last, but Jaden was unfazed. He was solving them with a quiet confidence, block by block, piece by piece. He was in his element. But just when he thought he had it all figured out, the fourth problem hit him like a brick wall. It was a multi-step problem, blending calculus with probability and statistics. The numbers swirled in his mind, the equations confusing and tangled. He couldn't seem to make sense of it. He stared at the screen, trying to get a grip on the problem, but the more he thought, the more it slipped away from him. Panic crept into his mind, and for a split second, Jaden felt like he was back in that place, the place where doubt overwhelmed him, where failure loomed over his every move. He could feel the pressure of the room, the silent judgment of the other students, the idea of everything he had worked for slipping through his fingers. But then he stopped. He breathed deeply, just like his mom had taught him. This was a challenge. This was what he had signed up for. You've got this, Jaden. Keep pushing. He cleared his mind and refocused. He broke the problem down into smaller parts, tackling it bit by bit. His hands flew over the paper, scribbling out calculations, making connections. Slowly but surely, the solution started to materialize. With only a few minutes left, Jaden felt a wave of relief. He had solved the problem. He smiled to himself, knowing that this round, like all the others, had been about perseverance. About pushing through the moments of doubt and pushing forward. As the final buzzer rang, signaling the end of the competition, Jaden sat back in his chair, exhausted but proud. He had faced some of the toughest math problems he had ever encountered, and he had given it his all. Whether he won or lost didn't matter anymore. He had proved something to himself, that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. The competition had ended. The buzz of the final buzzer still echoed in Jaden's ears as he filed out of the hall, exhausted and proud. He had made it through, had pushed himself further than he ever thought possible. The feeling of relief was overwhelming, but it didn't last long. As the students shuffled out of the main event room, everyone was still processing the gravity of what they had just been through. The tension that had gripped the room all day hadn't quite dissipated. Jaden found a quiet spot in the corner of the conference center to sit, just for a moment. His legs ached, his mind was tired, and the weight of the day's challenges had caught up with him. It was hard to believe it was all over. But before he could even catch his breath, a voice called out from the stage at the front of the room. "Attention, everyone," said a tall woman with a microphone. She stood at the podium, her voice clear and authoritative. "We will now begin the announcement of the results. Please find your seats as we prepare to recognize the top participants." Jaden's stomach twisted. He hadn't expected this immediate turn. Sure, he had known the competition would have winners, but after all the pressure of the day, hearing that the results were being announced felt real. It felt like the culmination of everything he'd worked for, everything that had kept him awake late at night, poring over equations and formulas. But he wasn't ready for the whirlwind of emotions that flooded over him in that moment. He stood slowly, and as he made his way back into the main hall, he saw the other students gathering together in clusters, their eyes wide, their faces filled with both excitement and anxiety. Jaden couldn't help but feel a little out of place. He didn't belong to any of these cliques, he was just a small-town kid from a school that most people probably hadn't heard of. But he knew that didn't matter anymore. He had done his best. He had stayed true to himself. Taking a seat, Jaden tried to calm his nerves. He watched as the woman at the podium shuffled some papers and adjusted the microphone. The silence in the room was deafening, and as she began speaking again, Jaden could hear the slight tremor in her voice, the same kind of nervous energy that he was feeling. "We want to thank all of you for your hard work and dedication today. This was one of the most challenging rounds we've ever had, and you should all be incredibly proud of yourselves." The crowd shifted, murmuring. Jaden couldn't help but feel the weight of those words. But then, as if on cue, the woman cleared her throat and continued. "And now, the moment we've all been waiting for. The top 5 finalists, in no particular order, will be recognized for their outstanding performance today." Jaden's heart skipped a beat. He had thought, maybe, just maybe, he might have a shot at being in the top 5. But that was the kind of thinking that always got him into trouble. He couldn't afford to get his hopes up. She paused dramatically. "First, we'd like to recognize Emily Jackson from Sunnydale High School." A burst of applause erupted in the room as Emily, a girl with dark, curly hair and bright glasses, stood up to take her place at the front. She smiled shyly, clearly surprised but proud. The crowd clapped for her as she made her way to the stage. "Next," the woman continued, "we have Ethan Lawson from Riverwood Academy." Another round of applause as a tall, lanky boy with glasses stood up, nodding nervously at the crowd before heading to the stage. Jaden's nerves kicked into overdrive. Was his name next? "And now, we'd like to recognize Jaden Matthews from Willowbrook High School," the announcer said. Jaden froze. For a split second, he couldn't believe what he was hearing. His name. His heart hammered in his chest. His stomach flipped. He was barely able to process the words as the entire room erupted into applause. He stood up shakily, his legs feeling like jelly, and made his way to the front of the room. The applause seemed endless, but it felt surreal. Jaden felt a rush of emotions, surprise, disbelief, pride, and gratitude, all blending together in a whirlwind. As he walked toward the podium, he glanced at the other students who had already gathered there. Emily smiled at him as he approached, and Ethan gave him a thumbs up. They were all top contenders, just like him. And in that moment, Jaden realized something: he had made it here on his own merit. He wasn't just the underdog anymore. He had earned his place. "Jaden, congratulations," the announcer said, shaking his hand. "You've done an incredible job today, and we're proud to recognize you as one of the top 5 finalists. You should be incredibly proud of your performance." Jaden nodded, trying to swallow the lump in his throat. "Thank you," he managed, his voice a little shaky. The other finalists smiled at him, and as the applause continued, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It was surreal. He had come so far, and now here he was, standing among the best in the country. But even as he stood there, basking in the glow of his success, a quiet thought kept lingering in his mind: what now? After the ceremony, as Jaden made his way back to his seat, the feeling of triumph began to settle into something deeper. He had been recognized. He had made it to the top 5, just as he had hoped. But somehow, that didn't feel like the final victory. There was more work to be done, more hurdles to overcome, and Jaden knew that this was only the beginning. He wasn't sure exactly what the next steps would be. But he knew one thing for sure: the journey wasn't over. In fact, it was just starting. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jaden sat back in his seat, still processing the whirlwind of emotions that had overtaken him since his name had been called. Being in the top 5 of the National Math Challenge was something he had always dreamed of, but now that he was actually there, the reality of it felt even bigger than he had imagined. The applause still rang in his ears, the momentary excitement of hearing his name still fresh in his mind. But there was no time to dwell on it. The next challenge was already looming ahead. As the room settled down, the event organizer took the stage again. She adjusted the microphone and smiled warmly at the crowd, her energy infectious as she addressed the group. "Congratulations to all of you," she began, her tone full of pride. "What we've just witnessed is truly extraordinary, and we are so proud of every one of you. But the day isn't over yet. Now that we've announced the top 5 finalists, we move on to the final, most challenging part of the competition." Jaden's stomach did a flip. He thought he had already faced the hardest part of the day, but now, the reality set in. The final round. The grand finale. The woman continued, "In this final round, the problem we're going to present isn't something you'll be solving with your calculators or just simple equations. No, this is about creativity. Innovation. The ability to think beyond the boundaries of what you know." A murmur of uncertainty rippled through the crowd. Jaden felt a similar sense of unease creep into his chest. Creativity. Innovation. Those words didn't sound like something you could prepare for in the same way he had spent months preparing for the algebra and calculus problems. He had always been good at numbers, at solving equations, but now it felt like he was stepping into unknown territory. But, the announcer added with a grin, "There's one more twist. This final round isn't just about solving the problem. It's about presenting your solution. You'll have to explain your reasoning, walk through your thought process, and convince our panel of judges that your solution is the most effective." A murmur of disbelief ran through the finalists, and Jaden's mind immediately went into overdrive. Presentation. Public speaking. That wasn't exactly his strong suit. He preferred working quietly behind the scenes, solving problems in the comfort of his own mind. But this was something entirely different. The thought of standing up in front of a panel of judges and presenting his solution was suddenly a lot more intimidating than the problems he had just solved. His heart began to race. The woman continued, oblivious to the rising tension in the room. "We'll give you an hour to work on the problem. You'll have access to all the tools you need, pens, paper, and, of course, your minds. Once the hour is up, you'll each be given 15 minutes to present your solution. Remember, this is not just about getting the right answer, it's about the approach, the creativity, and your ability to communicate your ideas effectively. Judges will be looking for originality, clarity, and depth of thought." Jaden took a deep breath. Creativity. Presentation. Those were the things that had always made him nervous. But right now, he didn't have a choice. He couldn't let his nerves get the better of him. This was the moment he had been building up to for years. It was the pinnacle of everything he had worked for. "Are you ready?" Elijah's voice startled him from his thoughts. Jaden turned to find his friend standing beside him. Elijah had been by his side through every step of this journey, through the late-night study sessions, the doubts, and the small victories. Elijah had always been the one to push him, the one to remind him why he was doing this in the first place. Jaden smiled, grateful for his friend's unwavering support. "I don't know," Jaden admitted with a nervous chuckle. "I'm not sure how I'm going to present this. I've always been better at math than at talking." Elijah grinned. "Well, don't overthink it. You've been solving problems all day. You can do this too. Just think of it as another equation. Step by step." Jaden nodded, trying to absorb Elijah's words. Step by step. It didn't sound so bad when he put it that way. He had solved equations that seemed impossible before, why couldn't he do the same with this? All he had to do was break it down. Before Jaden could think too much about it, the countdown for the final round began. The clock on the wall started ticking down, 1 hour to solve the problem. The problem that appeared on the screen was nothing like the ones Jaden had faced so far. It wasn't a simple algebraic equation, nor a tricky calculus question. Instead, it was a complex puzzle involving geometry, probability, and a real-world scenario. It was one of those problems that forced you to think outside the box, to use logic in ways that were unfamiliar. The problem required him to design a system to predict the movement of a comet based on its gravitational interactions with other celestial bodies. Jaden had to consider variables like orbital mechanics and the gravitational pull from the sun, but he also had to think about the unpredictability of space itself, an area he had never studied deeply. At first, he was paralyzed with uncertainty. "How am I supposed to figure this out?" he thought. But then, remembering Elijah's words, he took a deep breath and dove in. He started with what he knew. He reviewed the fundamentals of orbital physics he had learned briefly in his science classes. He remembered the principles of gravity and motion and tried to apply them to the problem at hand. It wasn't easy, but he began to make progress, bit by bit. As the minutes ticked away, Jaden grew more confident. He had designed a conceptual model, a set of calculations, and a basic plan for how to predict the comet's movement. He was still shaky on some parts, but he felt like he was making headway. The final step would be the hardest part, presenting everything clearly and confidently to the judges. How could he possibly explain this in a way that would make sense? But he reminded himself, one step at a time. One step at a time. The hour passed in a blur. By the time the countdown ended, Jaden felt like his mind had been stretched beyond its limits. His notes were scribbled with calculations, diagrams, and arrows. But somehow, he had done it. He had solved the problem. Now, all he had to do was present it. The other finalists filed to the front of the room. Jaden joined them, his heart still racing. His presentation was coming up soon, and the thought of speaking in front of the judges made him want to turn and run. But he couldn't. He was already here. This was his moment. The room was tense as the top 5 finalists gathered at the front of the stage. Jaden's palms were sweating, and he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. His mind kept replaying every moment of the final round, the calculations, the problem, the slow and steady way he had pieced together the solution. But now, it all came down to one thing, the presentation. He glanced at his fellow competitors. Emily, Ethan, and the others were all looking just as nervous as he felt. They had all solved the same problem, but they would each approach it in their own way. Some would be more confident, others more creative. But one thing was certain, this was the moment that would define everything. This was the final test. As Jaden's turn approached, he watched the first competitor step up to the microphone. Emily went first. She took a deep breath and began to explain her solution, speaking with the kind of calm precision that only came from having practiced her presentation 1,000 times. Her solution was elegant, neat, and well-structured, and as she spoke, the judges nodded along. It was clear she was one of the strongest contenders. Next was Ethan, who stood a little taller than the rest, his voice steady as he presented his solution. His confidence radiated, and Jaden couldn't help but admire the way Ethan handled the pressure. His solution was thorough and detailed, with multiple ways to prove his findings. He'd clearly thought it through, and the judges were impressed. And now, it was Jaden's turn. His legs felt like jelly as he made his way to the podium. He glanced at the judges, 3 of the brightest minds in the country, all of whom had heard and seen the best of the best in mathematical problem-solving. His hands shook as he adjusted the microphone. This was it. He had to explain his process clearly, make them believe his solution was the right one, and show them why his approach was both innovative and grounded in solid reasoning. Jaden took another deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He'd been here before. He had presented projects, ideas, and solutions to teachers and classmates. But this was different. This was the most important presentation of his life. Good afternoon, Jaden began, his voice a little shaky at first, but growing steadier with each word. My name is Jaden Matthews, and today I'm going to walk you through the solution I developed for predicting the movement of the comet in the final challenge. It was a tough problem, but I believe I've created a model that can provide a reasonable prediction based on gravitational forces and orbital dynamics. He glanced at his notes for a brief moment, making sure he was on track, then turned back to the judges and continued. The key to solving this problem was recognizing that while we can predict the path of a celestial object with some degree of accuracy, there will always be variables that are unpredictable. So, I decided to approach it not just with the classical equations we would normally use, but by combining them with a Monte Carlo simulation, a method of statistical sampling, to account for those unknown variables. Jaden could feel the eyes of the judges on him. He could see their furrowed brows, their interest peaked. He was doing it. He was explaining his solution. But it wasn't just about the solution, it was about how he communicated it. He had to make them understand why his approach was not only unique, but also viable. The Monte Carlo simulation allowed me to simulate thousands of possible scenarios, based on the known variables, such as the mass of the comet, the gravitational pull of nearby planets, and even the perturbations caused by the solar wind, he said, drawing a diagram on the screen behind him. By running these simulations, I could get a range of possible paths the comet might take and calculate the probability of each trajectory. Jaden paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts, making sure he wasn't rushing through his explanation. He could see some of the judges taking notes. This was good. He was on track. Now, I know this solution may not be the only one, Jaden continued, and it's not perfect. The margin of error increases as the time span of the prediction grows. However, I believe that by continuously refining the model with updated data, we can improve the accuracy of our predictions over time. He finished his explanation and stepped back, giving the judges a moment to digest his words. He had done it. He had explained his solution in a way that made sense, and he hadn't rushed through it. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but he had given it his all. The room was silent for a few moments. Jaden stood there, his heart racing, waiting for the judge's response. He wasn't sure what to expect. His mind was a whirlwind of possibilities. Had he done enough? Had his approach been creative enough? Did the judges like his method? Was it too complex? Finally, one of the judges, a woman with short, dark hair and glasses, leaned forward and spoke. "Jaden, I must say, I'm impressed," she began. "Your approach was innovative, and your understanding of the problem was clear. The use of Monte Carlo simulations was an interesting choice. I can see how it could be effective in addressing the uncertainty of the comet's movement. That's something we don't often see in problems like this, someone thinking beyond the standard equations and considering the larger scope of variables." Jaden's breath caught in his throat. She was impressed. She liked it. However, the judge continued, "I'd like to ask you a question. You mentioned that the model could be improved with updated data over time. Could you elaborate a bit more on how you would go about gathering that data, and how often you would update the simulations?" Jaden nodded, grateful for the chance to clarify. "Yes, of course. I would suggest using telescopes that monitor the comet's position regularly. The data could be collected through various observatories worldwide, and the more data points we have, the more accurate the model would become. I would also suggest using automated systems to gather the data in real time and feed it into the simulation to make adjustments to the predicted path." The judge smiled slightly. "I like the thoughtfulness behind that. Your approach shows an understanding not just of the problem, but of the real-world application." Jaden exhaled slowly, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't just that he had solved the problem, it was that he had communicated his solution in a way that the judges found both interesting and applicable. The next few minutes were a blur of feedback from the judges. Some praised his creativity, others challenged his assumptions. But through it all, Jaden felt more and more confident in his work. When the final competitor stepped up to present, Jaden returned to his seat, his mind still buzzing with adrenaline. He had done it. He had taken on one of the hardest problems he'd ever faced and emerged from it with a sense of accomplishment. But as the judges continued their questions and evaluations, one thing was clear: the competition wasn't over yet. The final decision was still to come, and no one knew who would be crowned the winner. Jaden's heart raced once more. This was it. The moment of truth was just around the corner. The final competitor wrapped up his presentation, and the judges began discussing amongst themselves in hushed tones. Jaden could feel his heart beating in his chest as he sat at the edge of his seat. The tension in the room was palpable. For the first time in his life, Jaden felt completely out of control, waiting for the verdict that would determine whether all his hard work had been enough. Around him, the other finalists were equally nervous. Emily was fidgeting with her sleeve, Ethan had his arms crossed tightly, and the others were sitting still, their faces a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Jaden couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie with them, even though they were all technically competitors. After all, they had all worked so hard to get here, each of them facing their own battles along the way. "Thank you all for your presentations," the event organizer said, breaking the silence and drawing everyone's attention. "This has been an incredible display of talent, creativity, and perseverance. It's clear that each of you has put in tremendous effort, and we are honored to have witnessed your work today." Jaden exhaled slowly, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. His palms were still sweating, and his stomach felt like it was tied in knots. It was surreal, this waiting game. How had the day gone by so quickly? He had gone from struggling with a seemingly impossible problem to now wondering if he had done enough to win it all. The organizers began pulling up the final leaderboard on the screen, and Jaden held his breath. There were only 5 of them left, and each of them had shown something special. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he wasn't sure if he was ready for the outcome. "Now, it's time for us to announce the results," the organizer said, her voice now filled with anticipation. The decision wasn't an easy one, but the judges have all reached a consensus. Jaden's mind raced, trying to figure out what the outcome might be. He knew he had done his best, but was it enough? Had his solution been unique enough? His explanation, had it been convincing? All he could do was wait and hope. The judges stood up, walking toward the front of the room. One by one, they each gave a brief statement about the competition. "The level of talent here today is remarkable," one judge began. "We've seen extraordinary problem-solving skills, ingenuity, and depth of thought. It's truly impressive." Another judge spoke next, a man with silver hair and a calm demeanor. "We've been blown away by the creativity and analytical thinking from each of you. It's not just about getting the right answer, it's about the journey you took to get there. We all faced different challenges, and every one of you handled those challenges with remarkable poise and intelligence." Finally, the lead judge, the woman who had asked Jaden about the Monte Carlo simulations earlier, stepped forward. She smiled at the finalists, and Jaden couldn't help but notice the warmth in her expression. It felt like she understood just how much this moment meant to all of them. "Now, the time has come," she said. "Let's get to the results." Jaden's breath caught in his throat. He could feel his pulse in his ears. His body felt frozen, and for a moment, it was as though the room had shrunk down to just him and the lead judge. The entire world felt suspended in time. She turned to the screen behind her and pressed a button. The leaderboard flickered to life, and the names of the top 5 finalists appeared. "Fifth place," she began, her voice calm and measured, "goes to Ethan Ramirez. Congratulations on your hard work and dedication." Ethan looked a little disappointed, but he smiled and nodded as the audience clapped for him. Jaden couldn't help but respect Ethan's performance. He had been confident and poised, and it had clearly paid off for him. "Fourth place," the judge continued, "goes to Emily Johnson. A fantastic effort, Emily. Well done." Emily, who had seemed so confident earlier, smiled graciously as the applause rang out. Jaden could see the disappointment in her eyes, but she took it with dignity, acknowledging her accomplishment. Then, the moment Jaden had been waiting for. The judge cleared her throat, and Jaden's heart rate spiked. "Third place," the judge said, her voice even, "goes to Leah Sullivan. A brilliant solution, Leah. Your creativity was outstanding." Leah, another competitor with a calm and collected demeanor, smiled in acceptance, but Jaden could see the small flicker of disappointment in her eyes. Third place was no small feat, but Jaden knew that they were all thinking the same thing. It was the final 2 that mattered now. "And now," the judge said, pausing dramatically, "the moment we've all been waiting for. Second place in this year's National Math Challenge goes to..." Jaden's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was where the journey had led him. "Jaden Matthews," the judge said, her voice full of warmth and respect. Jaden felt the blood rush to his face, his mouth going dry. The audience erupted in applause, but it sounded distant, as if Jaden were underwater. He heard his name, but it didn't quite feel real. Was he hearing that right? Second place. He had come so far, and now, standing there, he felt a strange mixture of emotions. Joy, pride, and yes, a little bit of disappointment too. He had wanted to win it all. He had worked so hard for this moment. But at the same time, second place was an incredible achievement. It was more than he had ever imagined. The judge smiled at him and nodded. "Jaden, your solution was both creative and thorough. Your explanation was clear, and your approach to the problem showed great depth of understanding. Congratulations." Jaden stepped forward, his knees a little weak, to accept his second-place prize. As he shook the judge's hand, he realized something profound: he had done it. No matter what place he finished in, he had proven to himself that he was capable of more than he had ever thought possible. The applause continued as the audience recognized his effort. It wasn't the top prize, but Jaden was proud of what he had accomplished. "And now," the judge continued, smiling, "the winner of this year's National Math Challenge is..." Jaden held his breath, his mind racing. He had come so far. He had given everything he had. And the winner is. The silence in the room was deafening. Jaden's heart seemed to stop as the final words echoed in his mind. The winner. The one who would take home the ultimate prize, the recognition, and the opportunity to change their life. And the winner is, the judge's words hung in the air, stretching time. Jaden barely dared to breathe. Ethan Ramirez. The announcement hit like a wave crashing against the shore. Ethan, who had placed fifth in the past year's competition, had done it. He had won. The crowd erupted into applause, cheering loudly for Ethan's achievement. Jaden stood frozen in place, unable to process what had just happened. He clapped along with everyone else, but the sound seemed distant in his ears. Ethan had won the National Math Challenge. Ethan's face broke into a grin as he walked up to accept his prize. Jaden's eyes followed him, and for a brief moment, he felt a pang of envy. He had come so close, but in the end, it wasn't enough. His mind raced, replaying every detail of the competition. Had he made a mistake? Had he missed something crucial? No. He couldn't dwell on that. He had done his best. And Ethan had truly deserved this victory. Congratulations, Ethan, the lead judge said as she handed him the trophy. Your performance was exceptional, and your solution to the problem was brilliant. You truly earned this title. Ethan accepted the trophy with a humble smile, shaking hands with the judges before turning to face the audience. The applause was deafening. He had worked so hard for this, and now, all of his effort had paid off. Jaden felt a sense of pride wash over him despite his disappointment. He couldn't deny that Ethan had earned it. He had come a long way since last year, and this victory was proof of his growth. As the crowd settled down, the judges announced that all of the finalists would receive a scholarship for further education in mathematics, regardless of where they placed. That brought a smile to Jaden's face. He had made it into the top 5, and no matter what, that was something worth celebrating. He'd be able to continue his education and push himself further. The ceremony wrapped up quickly after the announcements. Jaden shook hands with the judges and exchanged congratulations with the other competitors. But even as he congratulated Ethan, part of him couldn't shake the feeling that he had let himself down. He walked slowly off the stage, the weight of second place heavy on his shoulders. But then, as he passed through the door and into the hallway, he saw something that made him stop. Standing by the exit was his mom. She was waiting for him, holding a small bouquet of flowers. When she saw him, she broke into a wide smile, her eyes filled with pride. Jaden, she said, rushing forward to embrace him. I'm so proud of you. You did amazing up there. You should be so proud of yourself. Jaden blinked, his eyes suddenly stinging. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear those words until now. He had been so caught up in the competition, in the pursuit of victory, that he hadn't stopped to think about how far he had come. Thanks, Mom, Jaden said, his voice tight. He hadn't even noticed how much the disappointment had been weighing on him until now. But her words, her pride, it was enough to break through the barrier of frustration he had built around himself. You've always been my inspiration, his mom continued, and nothing about that changed today. You're incredible, Jaden. For a moment, Jaden just stood there, letting her words sink in. The sting of not winning first place started to fade, replaced by a deeper sense of contentment. He had pushed himself. He had worked hard. And he had come so close. That was worth celebrating in its own right. I guess second place isn't so bad, huh? Jaden said, managing a smile. His mom chuckled, pulling him into a hug again. It's more than not bad. It's incredible. You've got a bright future ahead of you, and this is just the beginning. Jaden took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day start to lift. He had come to terms with the results. He hadn't won, but he had achieved something he was proud of. He had learned, grown, and been a part of something bigger than himself. The experience had changed him, and he was ready to embrace the next chapter of his journey. The next few days passed in a blur of congratulations, media coverage, and interviews. Jaden received messages from his friends, teachers, and even strangers who had followed the competition. He was proud to have made it this far. But the biggest realization came when he was sitting at home, going over the notebook filled with his notes on the competition. He glanced at the complex math problems, the simulations, and the solutions he had developed. It was then that he truly understood, this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Jaden didn't need the top prize to know that he had what it took to make an impact in the world of mathematics. This competition had opened doors for him, and the skills he had developed weren't just for solving equations, they were for thinking critically, solving real-world problems, and never giving up in the face of challenge. As he closed his notebook and stood up, a sense of excitement filled him. There was so much more to learn, so many more problems to solve. And he was ready to tackle them all. The next chapter in his life was waiting. And Jaden was more determined than ever to dive into it. Jaden woke up early the next morning, the sun still low on the horizon. He was still on a high from the competition. Despite the disappointment of not winning first place, there was a feeling of accomplishment that kept him going. The events of the past week had shifted something inside him, something he couldn't quite explain. It was a sense of purpose, a recognition that he was on the right path. He sat up in bed and looked out the window, his mind racing with new ideas. The scholarship from the competition would open doors for him, but there was more to it than that. He had been given a platform, a chance to prove himself, to make a difference. And now, he was more determined than ever to push himself even further. After a quick breakfast, Jaden headed to the local library, a place he'd frequented many times growing up. It was there that he'd first discovered his passion for mathematics, where he'd spent hours poring over books, solving problems, and imagining possibilities. He had always felt at home among the quiet shelves, surrounded by the wisdom of countless authors. As he stepped inside the library, he was greeted by Ms. Allen, the librarian who had always encouraged his curiosity. "Good morning, Jaden." Ms. Allen called out from behind the desk, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "I saw you on TV last night. Second place. That's incredible." Jaden smiled, feeling a wave of warmth spread through him. Ms. Allen had always believed in him, even when he doubted himself. "Thanks, Ms. Allen," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "It was a great experience. I can see that." "So, what's next for you?" she asked, leaning forward with interest. Jaden paused for a moment, taking in the question. What was next? It was the question he had been asking himself all week. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sure. But he had a few ideas. "I think I'm going to apply to a few prestigious universities," he said. "Maybe even look into some advanced mathematics programs. There's still so much I want to learn." "That's the spirit," Ms. Allen exclaimed. "You've got the drive, Jaden. And you're capable of achieving anything you set your mind to." Jaden felt a surge of confidence as he spoke. For the first time, he realized how much support he had in his corner. His family, his teachers, and even the friends he had made during the competition, they all believed in him. And now, more than ever, he believed in himself. He spent the next few hours browsing through the library's collection, pulling out books on complex math theories, algorithms, and computer science. There was so much to explore, so much potential to unlock. The world of mathematics was vast, and he was just beginning to scratch the surface. Later that afternoon, Jaden received an unexpected call. It was from Professor Carter, the renowned mathematician who had been one of the judges at the competition. Jaden's heart skipped a beat as he picked up the phone. "Hello, Jaden." Professor Carter's voice came through clearly. "This is Professor Carter. I hope you're doing well after the competition." "I'm doing great, thank you." Jaden replied, surprised and excited. "What's up?" "Well, I wanted to personally congratulate you on your second-place finish. Your performance was outstanding, and we were all impressed with your approach to the problem, Professor Carter said. In fact, I'd like to offer you an opportunity to work with me on a research project. It's an advanced problem I've been working on, and I think you might be just the person to help me crack it. Jaden's mind raced. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. Working with Professor Carter, one of the most respected figures in the field, was something he had only dreamed of. Are you serious? Jaden asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I am, Professor Carter replied, chuckling. I've been following your progress, and I believe you have the potential to contribute something truly valuable to the field. If you're interested, we can discuss the details. Jaden's heart was pounding in his chest. Yes. I'm definitely interested. I would love to work with you. Great, Professor Carter said. We'll get in touch soon to discuss the specifics. I'm looking forward to seeing where this can go. As Jaden hung up the phone, he couldn't stop smiling. This was it, the moment that would shape his future. Everything he had worked for, every late night spent solving problems, every ounce of energy he had poured into his passion had led to this point. He couldn't believe it. A research project with Professor Carter. This was the opportunity that would propel him to new heights. Later that evening, Jaden sat down to reflect on everything that had happened. He opened his notebook and flipped through the pages, rereading the notes he had taken during the competition. He could still remember the feeling of uncertainty when he was faced with the hardest problems, but now he knew he had the ability to solve them. His mind wandered back to the moment when he had solved the toughest puzzle, the one that had earned him second place. The excitement of that breakthrough flooded back to him. He realized that it wasn't just about the victory or the accolades, it was about the process. The thrill of figuring something out, the satisfaction of understanding something that once seemed impossible. That was what had drawn him to math in the first place. Jaden closed the notebook, a sense of peace settling over him. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear, this was just the beginning. He had a long journey ahead of him, filled with challenges and discoveries, but he was ready for it. The phone rang again, and this time it was his mom. Hey, Jaden, she said, her voice warm. I just wanted to check in and see how you're feeling. I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished. This is only the beginning. I feel great, Mom, Jaden replied, his voice filled with excitement. I've got some amazing opportunities ahead of me. And I think this is just the start of something big. I knew it, his mom said, laughing softly. I always knew you were destined for great things. As Jaden hung up the phone, he realized that everything had changed. He was no longer the same person who had walked into that competition months ago. He had grown, learned, and discovered a new sense of purpose. The world was wide open, and he was ready to take it on. With a smile, Jaden closed his eyes for a moment and let the possibilities wash over him. The future was his for the taking. The days following Jaden's phone call with Professor Carter felt like a blur. A whirlwind of excitement, anticipation, and uncertainty. Everything was happening so fast. His life was shifting in ways he hadn't imagined possible just a few short months ago. Jaden found himself reflecting on his journey at odd moments throughout the day. It was hard to grasp that he was now being given a chance to collaborate with one of the most respected mathematicians in the world. His friends, family, and teachers all expressed their pride and support, but deep down, Jaden knew that this was just the beginning of a much bigger chapter. For now, though, there was something else on his mind. 1 week after the competition, Jaden sat in his bedroom, a large stack of college application forms in front of him. He had decided that, despite everything that had been happening with the research project, he needed to take the next step in his education. He'd been accepted to several prestigious universities, and now it was time to make a decision. He'd always dreamed of going to a top-tier school, one where he could dive deep into the world of mathematics, surrounded by brilliant minds who shared his passion. But now, with the opportunity to work with Professor Carter, the decision felt more complicated. Was it worth going to a university when he had already been given an invaluable opportunity to work with one of the best mathematicians in the field? Jaden glanced at the phone on his desk. He hadn't heard from Professor Carter since their call, and he knew it was time to get some clarity. He picked it up and dialed the number, his hands slightly trembling as the phone rang. "Hello." Professor Carter's voice came through the speaker. "Hey, Professor Carter," Jaden said, taking a deep breath. "It's Jaden. I just wanted to ask about the research project. I've been thinking a lot about it and I wanted to clarify a few things." "I'm glad you called, Jaden," Professor Carter replied. "Of course, let's talk." Jaden sat down on the edge of his bed and began explaining his dilemma. He shared his excitement about the opportunity but expressed the concern that it might conflict with his plans to attend college. He didn't want to miss out on a formal education, but at the same time, the chance to work directly with Professor Carter seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. "I totally understand your concern," Professor Carter said after a pause. "This is an important decision, and I want you to feel confident in your choice. You don't have to choose between college and the research project. There are ways to balance both." Jaden furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" "I know some professors who offer special arrangements for students in situations like yours," Professor Carter explained. "It's possible to enroll in a university and still work with me on the research project, either remotely or part-time. I've seen students manage both successfully. It'll be a challenge, but if you're up for it, it's definitely doable." Jaden felt a wave of relief wash over him. The prospect of working with Professor Carter and going to college didn't have to be mutually exclusive. He could do both, taking advantage of the best of both worlds. "I appreciate you saying that," Jaden replied. "That makes me feel a lot better. I want to do this, but I also want to continue my education in a formal setting." "You're making a great decision, Jaden," Professor Carter said warmly. "And I'm here to help guide you through it. You've got the talent and determination. With a little planning, you'll be able to make it all work." Jaden felt the weight on his shoulders lift. He now had a plan. He could pursue both his academic and research goals. His future was beginning to come together, and it felt like everything was falling into place. As they finished their conversation, Jaden hung up the phone with a new sense of purpose. The next few months were going to be demanding, but they were also going to be exciting. He was ready to take the leap. The following weeks flew by as Jaden prepared for both college and his research work. He filled out the necessary paperwork for the universities he had been accepted to and finalized his plans with Professor Carter. There were numerous phone calls and emails, countless details to iron out, but with each step, Jaden's confidence grew. In the middle of all of this, Jaden's friends, Mia and Lucas, kept in touch, checking in on him and offering their support. They knew how much this opportunity meant to him, and their encouragement helped keep him grounded. One evening, Mia called Jaden to catch up. "So, have you figured everything out yet?" Mia asked, her voice filled with curiosity. "Yeah, I think so," Jaden replied, smiling. "I'm going to work with Professor Carter, but I'll also attend college. I've figured out a way to balance both." "That's amazing!" Mia exclaimed. "I knew you'd figure it out. You're going to crush it, Jaden. I have no doubt." "Thanks, Mia. It feels surreal, honestly. But I'm excited. I'm ready to take the next step." The next day, Jaden received an official email from one of the universities he had applied to. He had been accepted into their mathematics program with a full scholarship. The email was filled with details about orientation, course registration, and all the other typical, welcome to college, materials. Jaden's heart swelled with pride. This was it. The next chapter of his life was beginning. It was a lot to process all at once: college, the research project, the responsibilities that would come with both, but Jaden knew one thing for sure: he was ready. He had worked hard to get to this point, and he wasn't going to let anything hold him back. The future, filled with challenges and opportunities, was within his reach. He just needed to take that first step. With a final deep breath, Jaden picked up the phone and called his mom. "Mom," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. "I did it. I'm going to college, and I'm going to work with Professor Carter." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, then his mom's voice cracked with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, Jaden. You've worked so hard for this. I knew you could do it." Jaden smiled, feeling his heart swell with pride. This was just the beginning. And no matter where this journey took him, he knew one thing for certain: he was no longer the boy who had been unsure of his place in the world. He was Jaden, a young mathematician on the brink of something incredible. And he was ready to take on whatever came next. The first day of college arrived faster than Jaden had expected. It felt surreal, like he had been waiting for this moment for years, and yet when it finally came, he almost didn't know how to process it. He had just moved into his dorm room, unpacked his clothes, and arranged his books. The walls were bare, the room still felt foreign, and the excitement in the air was thick. It was a new chapter, one that promised new challenges, new friendships, and new opportunities. Jaden stood by the window of his room, looking out at the sprawling campus below. The university was enormous. There were so many buildings, each holding endless possibilities. The student body was diverse, a melting pot of people with different backgrounds and dreams, all eager to carve out their futures in a place that was meant to give them the tools they needed. It was overwhelming, but exhilarating. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the campus, Jaden felt the weight of it all settle on his shoulders. He had made it here on his own, and he knew the hard work had only just begun. But as he stared out at the vast campus, he also felt a deep sense of gratitude. He was here, and this was where he would prove to himself that all of his struggles had been worth it. The next morning, Jaden attended his first class, a lecture on advanced calculus. It was everything he had imagined and more. The professor was engaging, the material challenging, and the classroom filled with bright, eager students. Jaden felt a rush of excitement as the lecture began, the professor diving straight into complex equations that he had spent years trying to understand. This was his world, the world of math. And for the first time, he was surrounded by others who shared his passion. But even as the class proceeded, Jaden couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. This was what he had wanted, to be in an environment that would push him to grow, to be surrounded by others who were just as driven and focused. But it was also intimidating. He was no longer the best in his class. Here, he was just another student, struggling to keep up with the rigorous pace of the program. After the lecture, Jaden found himself in a cafe on campus, reflecting on the morning's class. The overwhelming pressure to succeed weighed on him. He had always been confident in his abilities, but now, surrounded by so many talented students, he couldn't help but question whether he truly belonged. Was he good enough to keep up? Could he really handle the challenge of both college and the research project with Professor Carter? Just as Jaden was lost in thought, Mia called. Her voice was a welcome distraction. "Hey, Jaden. How's the first day of college going?" she asked, the excitement in her voice evident. "It's great, but honestly, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed," Jaden admitted. "The classes are tougher than I expected, and I feel like there's so much to keep up with." Mia chuckled softly. "I know exactly what you mean. It's like everyone around you is so smart, and it's easy to start doubting yourself. But you're there for a reason, Jaden. You earned your place. And remember, you don't have to do it alone." "I guess you're right," Jaden said, trying to shake off his doubts. "It's just hard, you know. I've got this research project with Professor Carter, and I don't want to fall behind in my classes. I'm scared I won't be able to handle everything." "Jaden, you're the hardest worker I know," Mia said, her voice steady. "And you've always risen to the challenge. You've got this. Just take it one day at a time, okay? You don't have to have everything figured out all at once." Jaden smiled, feeling a wave of comfort wash over him. "Thanks, Mia. I really needed to hear that." "Anytime," Mia replied warmly. I know you'll do great things, Jaden. Just remember, you're not alone in this. As Jaden hung up the phone, he felt a renewed sense of determination. He had always been someone who thrived under pressure, who found solace in solving problems, and who believed that every challenge was an opportunity for growth. Now, he would need to remember that. He wasn't alone, he had a support system, and he had the tools he needed to succeed. He just needed to keep pushing forward. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of assignments, lectures, and late-night study sessions. Jaden found himself buried in textbooks, solving problem sets, and attending office hours to make sure he was keeping up. But even as he worked tirelessly, he couldn't shake the feeling of constantly being behind. The weight of expectations, both his own and those he felt from others, was becoming harder to manage. And then there was the research project with Professor Carter. Jaden was excited to dive into the work, but every time he sat down to make progress, he found himself distracted by the demands of his college coursework. He struggled to balance both, feeling the constant pull between his need to excel academically and his desire to succeed in the research project. One evening, Jaden received an email from Professor Carter. It was a simple message, asking to set up a meeting to discuss their work together. Jaden immediately replied, eager to catch up with the professor and get back on track with the project. But as the meeting approached, Jaden couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't doing enough. He felt like he was letting Professor Carter down by not dedicating as much time to the research as he had promised. The day of the meeting arrived, and Jaden made his way to Professor Carter's office, his mind racing with self-doubt. He knocked on the door, and Professor Carter greeted him with a warm smile. Jaden, it's good to see you. Come in, the professor said, gesturing to a seat across from his desk. Jaden sat down, feeling nervous despite himself. Thanks for taking the time to meet with me, Professor. I just wanted to check in about the research. I know I haven't made as much progress as I should have. Professor Carter raised an eyebrow. I'm not concerned about your progress, Jaden. I know you've been balancing a lot, and I appreciate your dedication to both your studies and the project. You're a very bright student, and I believe in your abilities. But don't forget that it's okay to ask for help when you need it. Jaden was taken aback by the professor's words. You really think I can handle it? I know you can, Professor Carter said, leaning back in his chair. But I also know that sometimes the best way to succeed is to lean on others. Don't hesitate to reach out when you need guidance. You don't have to do it all on your own. Jaden nodded, feeling a sense of relief. Professor Carter's reassurance meant more to him than he could put into words. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to believe that he didn't have to carry the weight of everything by himself. With the right balance, he could succeed. As Jaden left the professor's office, he felt a sense of clarity. He didn't have to have everything figured out right away. He could take it one step at a time. College was a challenge, yes, but it was also an opportunity to learn and grow, both academically and personally. And with his passion for math, his support system, and the guidance of Professor Carter, Jaden knew he was capable of navigating whatever came next. The weight of expectations was still there, but now, he carried it with confidence, knowing that every challenge was an opportunity to rise to the occasion. Weeks passed in a blur. Jaden was adjusting to his life as a college student, managing to balance his coursework and the research project with Professor Carter. He had made progress, though it wasn't as smooth or fast as he would have liked. But he was getting there, one equation at a time, 1 hour at a time. He found himself staying late in the library more often than not, his mind consumed with formulas and hypotheses, his fingers flying across his notebook in search of the solution to a puzzle that he had yet to fully understand. It wasn't just the pressure of academics or his research project that weighed on Jaden's mind, it was the feeling of uncertainty. He was making strides in his studies, but the project with Professor Carter, the one that had seemed so exhilarating at first, now felt daunting. The problem they were working on was one of the most complex unsolved puzzles in mathematics, and every time Jaden thought he had a breakthrough, it slipped through his fingers like sand. Despite his growing frustration, there were moments when he felt a spark of excitement. The moment when a new piece of the puzzle clicked into place, even if it was only for a second, made the endless hours of effort worth it. But those moments were fleeting, and more often than not, Jaden found himself questioning if he was truly cut out for this kind of work. One evening, after a particularly grueling week of trying to make sense of a mathematical theory, Jaden sat alone in his dorm room, his eyes bleary from hours of staring at the screen. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Mia. "Mia, hey Jaden, I was just thinking about you. How are things going? Are you holding up okay?" Jaden smiled at the message. Mia always knew just when to check in, and her support had been a constant source of strength for him. He typed a quick reply. "Jaden, hey Mia, thanks for checking in. Honestly, I'm struggling. The research is tougher than I thought, and I'm not sure I'm making any progress. I keep running into roadblocks, and it feels like I'm not getting any closer to solving the puzzle." There was a pause before Mia responded. "Mia, I get it. I really do. But you're not alone in this, Jaden. I know it's frustrating, but I've seen how much you've grown. You're not going to give up on this. You're so close to figuring it out. Just keep going. One step at a time." Jaden took a deep breath, staring at the words on his phone. He appreciated Mia's encouragement, but in that moment, it felt like empty words. He wasn't sure if he was close to anything. The problem seemed impossible to solve, and each time he made an attempt, it felt like he was going in circles. He sat back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. A part of him wanted to quit, to walk away from it all, to return to the comfort of simpler problems that had an easy solution. But then he thought about how far he had come, from the student who had once doubted his own abilities to the one now working with one of the most renowned mathematicians in the world. If he quit now, it would all be for nothing. He couldn't just give up. Not after everything he had sacrificed to get here. His phone buzzed again, pulling him out of his thoughts. "Mia, I know this is hard. But remember the day you solved that impossible math problem in high school? You figured it out when no one thought you could. This puzzle is no different. You've done the impossible before, and you can do it again." Jaden stared at the screen, a faint smile creeping across his face. Mia was right. He had solved that impossible problem back in high school. The one that had earned him the admiration of his peers and teachers alike. At the time, he had felt like an imposter, not knowing how he had even cracked the code. But in hindsight, it had been his persistence, his refusal to back down, that had led to the breakthrough. Maybe this was the same. Maybe the answer was right there in front of him, buried under layers of frustration and self-doubt. He just needed to dig a little deeper, push through the confusion, and trust himself. With renewed determination, Jaden grabbed his notebook and opened his laptop. He scrolled through his research notes, looking for any clue that might lead him to the next step. His mind wandered back to his high school days, to that moment when he had refused to give up on the math problem despite all the doubts. He stared at the complex equations on the screen, trying to focus. The symbols and numbers had become a blur over the past few weeks. But then something clicked, something that hadn't made sense before suddenly began to form a pattern. Jaden's heart raced. He adjusted his glasses and leaned in closer to the screen, scribbling notes furiously on his paper. Slowly, methodically, the pieces began to fall into place. The pattern he had been searching for was there, hiding beneath layers of complexity. Hours passed as Jaden worked feverishly, his hands moving across the page, drawing connections, and solving parts of the puzzle that had previously eluded him. And then, just as the clock ticked past midnight, Jaden felt it, a sense of clarity. He sat back in his chair, exhausted but exhilarated. He had found it. He had found the breakthrough he had been waiting for. The next morning, Jaden sent an email to Professor Carter, outlining his findings. His heart raced as he clicked send. He was terrified of being wrong, of having missed something important, but he had to know. He had to hear the professor's opinion. A few hours later, his phone buzzed with a message from Professor Carter. Jaden hesitated for a moment before opening it. Professor Carter, Jaden, I reviewed your findings. This is remarkable. You've made a significant breakthrough. I believe we are closer than ever to solving this puzzle. I'm impressed. Let's meet and discuss the next steps. Jaden's breath caught in his throat. He had done it. The feeling of relief and triumph washed over him. The puzzle wasn't just a figment of his imagination anymore. It was real, and he was on the verge of solving it. As he sat there, staring at the screen in disbelief, Jaden couldn't help but smile. All the doubt, the frustration, the sleepless nights, it had been worth it. He had pushed through, and now, he was closer than ever to uncovering something truly extraordinary. But as excited as Jaden was about the breakthrough, he knew this was only the beginning. There would be more obstacles, more challenges, but now, he felt ready. He had proven to himself that he could do it. He could solve the hardest puzzle in mathematics, one step at a time. And this was just the start. Jaden had never felt so alive. The breakthrough he had been hoping for had finally arrived, and with it, an overwhelming sense of both relief and excitement. It wasn't just about solving the puzzle, although that alone would have been an incredible achievement. It was about proving to himself that he could push through, even when things seemed impossible. And now, he was on the brink of something even bigger. The email from Professor Carter had ignited a fire within him. They had agreed to meet the next day, and Jaden couldn't wait to share his findings. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of clarity, of purpose. The equations, the variables, the patterns, they were all starting to make sense in a way they hadn't before. That afternoon, as Jaden walked across campus to Professor Carter's office, his mind raced with possibilities. What would this breakthrough mean for the field of mathematics? What would it mean for his future? The excitement was almost too much to contain. He had always known he was meant for something bigger, but now, it felt tangible. He could almost taste it. When he arrived at the professor's office, he knocked on the door with a sense of anticipation. A few seconds later, Professor Carter's familiar voice called from inside. "Come in, Jaden." Jaden stepped into the office, where Professor Carter was seated behind his desk, a warm smile on his face. The professor's presence had always been a source of reassurance for Jaden, and today was no different. But there was an added energy in the air, a shared understanding that something significant was unfolding. "I've been reviewing your findings," Professor Carter said, his voice filled with excitement. "And I have to say, Jaden, you've made an incredible leap forward. This is groundbreaking work. It's clear you've been working tirelessly, and your perseverance has paid off." Jaden couldn't help but smile, his heart swelling with pride. Hearing those words from Professor Carter, someone he admired so deeply, felt like the culmination of everything he had worked for. "But I'm sure you already knew this was big, right?" Professor Carter continued, leaning forward. "We're on the verge of something major here. I can't wait to take this to the next level." Jaden nodded, feeling both exhilarated and humbled. "I just kept working on it, trying to connect the dots. I honestly didn't know if I was on the right track, but it felt like the pieces were finally coming together." "Absolutely," Professor Carter agreed. "This is the kind of breakthrough that doesn't happen every day. You've discovered something that could change the way we think about this problem. And I think we're ready to take it to the next stage." Jaden felt a rush of adrenaline. They weren't just solving an equation anymore. They were on the verge of something monumental. Over the next few days, Jaden worked closely with Professor Carter to refine their findings. They ran simulations, tested theories, and reviewed their work from every angle. Each moment felt like a countdown, the excitement building with every step closer they got to a final solution. The research project, which had once seemed like an insurmountable challenge, now felt like the greatest opportunity of Jaden's life. He had gone from struggling with self-doubt to standing at the edge of a major mathematical discovery. And through it all, he had come to realize something important, not just about math, but about life. The journey had taught him that success wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers right away. It was about persistence, about showing up even when things were tough, and about believing in the process. The puzzle had never been about finding a quick answer. It was about embracing the challenge, step by step, and allowing himself to grow along the way. As Jaden sat in Professor Carter's office one evening, looking over their final calculations, he felt a sense of satisfaction that he hadn't anticipated. He had started this journey unsure of his place in the world, unsure of his abilities. But now, with the final piece of the puzzle in place, he felt more certain than ever. "Jaden," Professor Carter said, breaking Jaden's reverie, "we're ready to submit this. You've done incredible work. This is your moment." Jaden nodded, trying to take in the enormity of what they had just accomplished. "It's hard to believe. We've really done it." Professor Carter smiled. "You've really done it, Jaden. This discovery is yours. You've earned every bit of it." That night, Jaden returned to his dorm, his mind buzzing with excitement. He still couldn't quite process everything that had happened. He had solved the hardest puzzle in mathematics, something that had seemed impossible just months ago. And in the process, he had learned more about himself than he could have ever imagined. He pulled out his phone and called Mia. "Hey," he said, his voice full of excitement. "We did it. We solved it." Mia's voice crackled through the phone. "What? No way. That's amazing. I knew you could do it." Jaden laughed, feeling the weight of everything lift off his shoulders. "It's surreal. But it's also just the beginning. There's still so much to learn, so much to discover." "You've got this," Mia said. "I've always known you had it in you." Jaden smiled. "Thanks, Mia. I couldn't have done it without your support." As they talked late into the night, Jaden realized that while this discovery was monumental, it wasn't the end of his journey. It was just one step towards something greater. He had found his path, and he wasn't going to stop now. There was a whole world of problems out there waiting to be solved, and Jaden knew that this was just the beginning. The future was wide open, and Jaden was ready to embrace it. He had faced his fears, conquered his doubts, and emerged stronger on the other side. He had proven that he was capable of more than he ever thought possible. And now, there was nothing he couldn't accomplish. The following weeks were a blur for Jaden. His breakthrough in mathematics had set off a chain reaction of events that would change the course of his life forever. After submitting their work to the academic community, Professor Carter and Jaden received invitations to present their findings at major mathematics conferences, where their discovery was met with both awe and respect. Jaden, who had once been a student unsure of his place in the world, now found himself standing among the brightest minds in mathematics. He was no longer just a student, he was a part of something bigger, something that had the potential to shape the future of his field. It was humbling, exciting, and, at times, overwhelming. The world was finally taking notice of Jaden's brilliance. But despite the accolades and the attention, Jaden remained grounded. He still carried the same humility and determination that had guided him through the hardest moments of his journey. He remembered the struggles, the moments when he had questioned his abilities, and how far he had come from that uncertain student who had struggled to even find his place in the world. As he prepared for the next big conference, Jaden took a moment to reflect. He was no longer the person he had been when he first set foot on the university campus. He had grown, not just as a mathematician, but as a person. He had learned that true success wasn't measured by external validation or recognition, it was about growth, resilience, and the courage to continue, no matter the obstacles. One evening, after a long day of preparations, Jaden found himself alone in his dorm room, staring out the window. The sun had set, casting a warm glow over the campus, and Jaden felt a quiet sense of peace. He had come a long way, but he knew that this was only the beginning. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many problems waiting to be solved. His journey in mathematics was far from over. But it wasn't just about the numbers and equations anymore. It was about the relationships he had built, the people who had supported him, and the lessons he had learned along the way. He thought about Mia, who had been there from the very beginning. She had believed in him when no one else did, and her unwavering support had kept him going even during the darkest times. He had come to realize that true success wasn't about solitary achievements, it was about the people you surrounded yourself with, the ones who believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself. Jaden smiled as he thought of his best friend, the one person who had always seen the potential in him. He pulled out his phone and sent her a message. "Jaden, I couldn't have done this without you. You were right all along. Thanks for being there for me every step of the way." A few seconds later, Mia's reply came through. "Mia, I knew you could do it, Jaden. You're amazing. You've always been destined for great things." Jaden leaned back in his chair, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He had worked so hard to prove to the world that he belonged, but now, he realized that the people who truly mattered already knew. The next day, Jaden stood in front of a large crowd at the mathematics conference, ready to present his work. His heart raced, but this time, it wasn't out of fear. It was out of excitement, a sense of purpose that he had never felt before. As he spoke about the breakthrough he and Professor Carter had made, he felt the weight of the moment, the culmination of years of hard work and self-doubt, finally lift off his shoulders. The audience listened intently, and when he finished his presentation, the room erupted into applause. Jaden felt a rush of emotions, pride, relief, and a profound sense of achievement. But amidst all the applause, one thought remained clear in his mind: this was only the beginning. Later that evening, as Jaden stood outside the conference venue, watching the stars twinkle above him, he realized that the journey he had embarked on had shaped him into someone entirely different. He was no longer the uncertain high school student, the one who had struggled to find his place. He was Jaden, the mathematician, the problem solver, and the person who had proven to himself that anything was possible if he kept pushing forward. And with that thought, Jaden made a promise to himself. He would never stop searching for answers, never stop challenging himself, and never stop believing in the impossible. As the conference came to a close, Jaden was faced with even more opportunities: scholarships, collaborations with renowned researchers, and even offers for teaching positions at prestigious universities. But as exciting as those prospects were, Jaden knew that the true reward was not the recognition or the accolades. The true reward was the journey itself, the growth, the lessons, and the knowledge that he had pushed through when it seemed like everything was against him. He smiled as he thought about his future. It was full of uncertainty, but it was also full of endless possibilities. There were still so many puzzles to solve, so many mysteries to uncover, and Jaden was ready to face them all. The path ahead was clear. He wasn't just solving math problems anymore. He was solving the puzzles of his life. And with each new challenge, he was becoming the person he had always dreamed of being. It wasn't about the destination, it was about the journey. And Jaden knew that this was just the beginning of something far greater than he could ever have imagined. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?